This is the Colombia Calling podcast. I am your host, Richard McColl, here in Bogota, Colombia, 2,600 meters closer to the stars. And this is episode 589 of the Colombia Calling podcast. We've got a pretty great podcast ahead for you. I'm very excited. We've got an academic in Villanova, Pennsylvania, and we have an academic, from Colombia originally via Michigan, but who's in San Diego, California at the moment. So we've had to, time this perfectly for us all to be here. So let me introduce first Professor David Anderson. He's the Associate Professor of Analytics at Villanova University in Pennsylvania. And in California, we've got Galia Benitez, who's Associate Professor in International Relations at Michigan State University. So both of you, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the Colombia Calling podcast.
Yep, thank you so much for having us today.
It's an absolute pleasure. I was contacted out of the blue by a media personality, I guess, in Villanova University, and suggesting that I perhaps read this case study. This academic paper that you guys are obviously part of, and it's called Using LLMs to Create Analytical Datasets, a case study of reconstructing the historical memory of Colombia. So it's right up my alley, and I read it, and I've reread it, and I've read it a third time, and I'm still getting my head around the technicalities of this. So perhaps we'll jump in from the very basics here, David, because I know you're the analytics guy. So first and foremost, LLMs. please, for me, and not my listeners, I'm sure they're far more well-versed than I am, but for me, please explain this.
So LLMs is large language models. That really just means ChatGPT or Anthropic Claude or Google Gemini or any of the 1,000 other open source ones that you can find. So that's the class of models that all of these text chatbots are.
So these are the search terms, I guess, for what you did for this huge, data set investigation into Colombia's, let's say the violence in Colombia.
Yeah. So there were sort of two aims of this project. There was sort of we're academics, so we have methodological aims and then we have domain aims, right? So on the methodological side, this was kind of a proof of concept of like the usability of these large language models, so ChatGPT, in social sciences research. So how well can it do at like reading and analyzing and synthesizing large text databases?
Wow. And I'm looking at it. You looked at 235,000 violence-related newspaper articles.
Yes. So Galia had this large data set of basically 240,000. Most of them were PDFs or JPEG images that were newspaper articles spanning 4 decades from the 80s all the way up into the 2020s. And they were like sitting here and they're just, it's 250,000, image files that, you can read, and some of them are fuzzy and some of them are crystal clear and some of them are truncated. And, so it's a huge, like rich data set, but it's, not very useful for people like me who are used to building statistical models because it's like blurry words in an image, and we really like doing math on numbers that are in like nice spreadsheet data frames.
Okay.
So the point of this project was to be like, can we use ChatGPT or other large language models to turn these newspaper articles into like a nice like tabular data set where we can ask questions and get answers and say yes, no, or where, or all of these things. So that we were the sort of first half of this paper was taking 240,000 articles and turning that into 240,000 rows in a spreadsheet that says, was this about one specific event of violence? Where was it? What was the city? Who were the attackers? Who were the victims? All of these sorts of things, so that you can ask these 25 or 30 questions of the large language model. And it does not a perfect job, but really a very good job of pulling out all of that information and putting it in a nice structured format. So you can give it an article. And my sort of mental model of this is like having infinity, like mostly competent high school students that like if you need it to be perfect, this is not like the tool for the job. But if you want something to be done very quickly and reasonably well, it does a great job at those sorts of things. So the first half of this paper is sort of presenting that it can do this, and then sort of digging into where it struggles and where it has problems, identifying what kinds of questions it does well at and which ones it does poorly at.
It's absolutely mind-boggling. This is a new frontier for investigation. I mean, obviously you've been involved in it for longer, but so how did you two get together? How did you decide, well, let's do this on Colombia? And how did Galia goes, well, I've got the data and the know-how, and let's speak to David who can put the analytics side together. Galia, how does this work? Because you're in different universities in different parts of the country and so on.
So we have another professor, Margaret, that she is in another university. And we actually, with her, we got a $1 million grant from the National Science Foundation to study how illicit drugs move throughout the American continent. Not just Colombia, but throughout. So we were a group of around 5 different professors from different universities. And so Margaret's last name, how is it? Like, I cannot pronounce it, David. Can you pronounce
it? Margaret was my PhD advisor. So her last name is Bjarnadottir, which is a mouthful for people who aren't speaking Icelandic on a daily basis.
And that's why we got in contact through Margaret, put us together, because David and Margaret works, I believe, very closely in many, many projects. And that's another thing as an academic, you began having your network of who works well with you, what type of knowledge, and the interests, I think, that are important also to put together. And so this grant, and that's why we got into this data set, because this grant we began looking at, because you can have, so Colombia has different organizations that have been collecting throughout, I wouldn't say the years, because in a way the data sets are not well collected. There are different data sets, and they are not systematically, and that's the part of academics that we want. We want each year so many rows and all the information about it. So that's why we began, because we didn't have enough information. We didn't have that data set with all the different data sets that, not all, the few data sets that exist out there. So Margaret and David, we began working together with another high school student that in the University of Maryland that Margaret brought.
I mean, it's fascinating to me because you're talking about the data sets and so on. And as someone who does investigations here in Colombia and a lot of things into the coca trade and violence and, and let's say illegalities, the data sets are incredibly difficult to manage and sometimes they make sense in the way they're collected, and sometimes they're just all over the place. You're like, why is that here and why is that there? And I had to do some research some time ago looking into sort of events. I guess it was illegal events by the police, and it was just a nightmare trying to do that. So in order to get the actual data sets that you're looking for, you put these questions in, and that's part of the filter. So can you give us like an example of the questions you were looking for?
Yeah, so we take each article and we ask first. I mean, this is 250,000 articles. Some of them are about one specific kidnapping or one specific conflict, instance of violence or a murder or a massacre, and then some of them are about political rallies that talk about the violence or marches or whatever. Right. So the first question is just to narrow down, like, is this article about one specific? Like, is this a news report about one specific instance of violence? And then we ask, was it a murder? Was it a kidnapping? Was it military conflict? Was it, one of these other, was it violence? Was it threats? Was it, harassment? Blah, 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 right? So we ask those questions, like what type of violence was it? Then we ask, who are the perpetrators? So was it, was it FARC? Was it ELN? Was it other right-wing paramilitaries? Was it the army? Was it, the police? Like those questions. Who are the victims? Were they civilians? Was it, was it like paramilitary violence? Was it civilians? Then we ask how many people were hurt or killed. And then we ask other questions about, was it drug related? Was it, where did it happen? We can use that to get the latitude and longitude so that we can map it up. And those were the main questions. And then we sort of ask, sort of specific, was it FARC? Was it ELN? Was it, like these sort of specific groups that we're interested in?
I want to add something. And I think this is the interesting part of working together from different fields, because those were, in general, the questions that we came after many other different questions too. Because sometimes you think like, okay, this is a clear question, but it's not. So for example, things like the group name. So what's this FARC? So as simple as that, you will assume yes or no, isn't it? But when we began with ChatGPT, began reading it, so sometimes the news doesn't say that it's FARC, but for example, it says is the front, el frente, 20. So it doesn't say FARC per se. So, and here is, I think that a person that does more qualitative analysis like me and David can work together, because it's the subtleties. As David put it very well, is to have a high school or an undergraduate doing your research. So there are things that that the ChatGPT doesn't know. Yeah. So that's where I think the combination that is really important in this matter.
That's to me, you see, is so very exciting. So you can take the analytical side, but also that qualitative side, and just years of collected knowledge. You can say, Galia, listen, that's not right. I think, and I can just imagine it, because I can think of articles in the press just talking about the columna Teofilo Forero. Is it Teofilo Forero? Yeah. So that's like the FARC special force, or the Pisa Suaves of the ELN, or something like that wouldn't come up in that. And also, I don't know. And so all of these articles, they are taken from a 20-year window, 30-year window, 1992 to 2022. This is when so these are pretty important. This is a pretty important 30-year window in terms of Colombia's conflict, if not the most important, let's say. Well, I mean, we could argue honest, but if we think about the actual sort of increase in violence and the breadth of the violence and the way that it's spread, and of course I guess I would say the flood of narco trafficking through the country, 1992, that kind of era, and you came out with 78,685 violent events. That's a terrifying number. I mean, that's a truly terrifying. But it could be less because of the way ChatGPT interprets it. It could be a lower number than the actual reality.
I mean, yeah, for sure. One, there's like how sensitive are we? Are we missing something? And two, like this data set is just what's been collected from, I mean, so this is, not every single event has a newspaper article written about it. And then not every newspaper article makes it into this data set, right? So it's a leaky pipeline, but we think that it's, we think that this is, using technology to unlock this bottom up kind of collection and preservation of the memory that, there aren't official statistics that are reliable or believable for a lot of reasons. So this is like one way to kind of generate and codify that sort of in an open source, like reproducible kind of way that everybody can see and validate.
That's what I think very interesting. Again, when we come back to the official data, I mean, what has been obviously referred to a lot in this article, in this document, is the Centro de Memoria Histórica, an incredibly important entity here in Colombia. But their records, as you state, is 1970. Well, you look through 1970 to 2012, and then in recent years, and I realize that hasn't been included, whoever's been in charge has been, like politically nominated. Especially, let's take the last presidential tenure. They had a very different way of collecting the data and saying it. So, for someone like you, Galia, I mean, you have to come into this. I would say even more subjectively and say, no, this can't be right. Let's go back over this data.
Yeah. So, because I grew up in Colombia, I'm Colombian, and it was hard, like the 1980s and 1990s, to find information. So we're living in a different world right now that we have, even though the data sets that exist are incomplete, there are different foundations that have put together, and we not we, but I guess we Colombians, but there are people that have died to put this data together. So here I want to talk about that the Center for Research and Popular Education, the CINEP.
Nice.
This, for example, it's a very important, that's where our data set comes. This, I remember when I went to La Universidad de los Andes, that is really close to the center, and we used to do it. They used to actually cut the newspapers. And when I say the newspapers, not just the national newspapers, but also regional papers. You used to go and sit down there, and they used to, so all this work that it began also, and they actually, the CINEP, there were researchers that they were killed at the time. So there have been a lot of people that have given their life to put these data sets together. And also, I want to add that all these data sets are difficult to put together because first you need to protect certain voices that we don't want to identify, isn't it? That, for example, groups can actually, and when I say groups, could be the government, could be also the criminal organizations, that can identify it. So data sets are so important, and we forget about to have a memory that we can work and do research, not just as Colombians, but in the world.
This is a really important point. You're talking about, again, it's the personal, the emotional, and the lived. And David comes in with, looking at how to use the data. Were there moments where you had heated debates in the team, how to be more? David, I'll cut to the chase. Are you now sensitive to some of the data that came through, but rather than just seeing it as you said, like a spreadsheet with lines? This is actually, human lives and violent events.
So absolutely. One of the big parts of this process is like what we call deduplicating the data. So you might have 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 articles about the same news, about the same event, and then you how do you go through this data set and collapse those down to just one row, because we want not one row per article, but one row per event. So that was a month where we spent reading through all of these, and it's just the scale and the devastation is really eye-opening. And it's I, as a statistician, spend my life zoomed out at 30,000 feet, and it's it makes you not forget what each of those numbers really truly represents.
Well, I think it's an incredibly important thing. Go on.
Oh,
go on, Galia. Go.
David and I, we work on this data set and the duplication process. I want to ask you something, David, because for you as a statistician, it's just numbers in general, isn't it? So, but we actually did that duplication together. You took a data set, I took the same data set, and we did it together. So I wonder, like for you, because also part of this was the translation of the articles to English, even though David speaks a lot of Spanish, but how did it feel, David, to sit down during hours in a different type of research than normally you do?
Yeah, I mean, it's just so eye-opening, the scale and like the just everyday life is so impacted by this that, I grew up in American suburbs and have not seen 1% of this in my whole life, and then you just read article after article of politician and judge and journalist all being dragged from their home. And, it's just like, this is truly eye-opening to like really read what each of these dots on these maps means.
That's what I would think. I've been coming to Colombia, moved here full time in 2007, but had been coming since 1998, reporting and being in the region. But at no point am I privy to the same, let's say, resilience and trauma that all Colombians actually exhibit. The whole country has PTSD. I grew up in privilege in the UK, and as I said, holidays in the US, and so on. And so once you realize, of course, that every single Colombian family has been affected without fail. Without fail. And then, as you said, you speak Spanish. Now you speak Spanish a lot better, I think, David, reading all of these articles. But perhaps when you engage someone in a Spanish conversation, your language is now very morbid. Because you've been going through 78,685 violent events. It's got to be tough. It's got to be tough. But on that point, it's really fascinating to me. This combination of different, the different modes of research and the different fields. So we've got Galia, we've got David, and of course the others. Galia, were you on the whole content with the way the results came out, or did you think, hang on a second, I know that Nariño, that area, has been more strafed by violence, or Arauca or Putumayo, we've got to go back through this? Was there something that was disappointing for you?
Not at all. I think there are two things. One is about the information that we find, and the other one is the methodological aspect of the research. So the methodological aspect of the research, this is amazing tool, because sometimes we have a lot of data sets that are qualitative in nature, and there is amazing professors or amazing people that do statistics, quantitative methods, that do not study certain topics. Mm-hmm. So I think this is the first time that we can begin working together, that we have tools to begin process data that before we wouldn't. I would have never been able to process this data, not even with my group of students that I have, that we are like a group of 5 students, to read this information. No way. How many years would have taken me to do this manually? So methodologically speaking, I think it's very, very, very important to our research, and also to begin having, I'm a huge advocate to do interdisciplinary research. People like David, that it's not Colombia, his interest is not about Colombia. It's very interesting to start working at the margins. And the other part of this is how satisfied is about what we found. I think it's really interesting, but what I would have liked to found and to do much more is to take all these data sets. We have 3 or 4 different data sets. So we did kind of like a pilot. Would you call it a pilot, David? Like kind of a pilot with the Centro Memoria Histórica. But there are other 2 or 3 data sets that we can think about that have been collected, for example, by the Paz, la Fundación de Ideas para la Paz, for example, the Centro de Memoria Histórica, that's what we use. Also, other organizations that they're very controversial, but like the livestock organization because of their connection with paramilitarism.
Fedegan?
So, Fedegan, exactly. So, but they all have data sets, isn't it? And I would love to actually keep working on these and expand it and to put all these data sets to actually put some sort of reality. So that's the part that I'm a little bit dissatisfied, in the sense that there is a lot of work to do still to put numbers that reveal, and I don't know how close we'll be to the actual reality. And I guess I extended a little more of what you wanted to do, but it's like, what is a victim? No, that is hard. Who determines what a victim is, and what year the victim is considered? No, what are the line of the year? No, that I think this is what we could have a lot of controversy with different groups and ideological groups too. No.
That's it. Is, you know, when does the violence start? When does the conflict officially start? When does the FARC founded officially, the ELN and so on, the paramilitaries as a group defending their farms, then start investing into, you know, becoming involved in the illicit nature of Colombia. It's very difficult. I mean, we've seen this very much with the HEP, or the Jurisdicción Especial para la Paz, the special peace jurisdiction at the moment. Is where do you draw these lines and so on? Yeah, that's got to be hard. That's not, I wouldn't say that's, you know, David has a different, different view of this, because we're taking a year and we're taking another year, and that it's not, you know, I would be dissatisfied as well. But David obviously is looking to how do we push the envelope and grow this type of analytical model, which I find, again, it's so interesting to me. What can be done in measuring, we're talking Colombia, and I think Colombia is obviously a very good example to start with, sadly, because there is so much violence. So you know you're picking it up. You know it's going to be a huge number. And while it is shocking in the 30 years of 78,685, it's not, you know, it's not an unusual number. You'd be like, well, yes, Colombia in that 30 years was awful. I mean, truly awful. So, that I think being able to sort of transpose this to look into human rights violations, other violence, like criminal organizations, the roots that you have studied as well, Galia, in narco trafficking. What are the major roots? I could think of a recent phenomenon, which of course hasn't gone away, but it continues evolving, is, again, migration. I think that would be an incredible thing to study. But where do you get all the figures from as well? Because, you know, sometimes they turn up, let's say if we're talking about the Americas, sometimes they're registered in Panama, but sometimes they're not. And sometimes they don't cross the border, you know, in Tijuana and people who don't make it. I mean, the limitations are huge, but the opportunities as well are huge. David, I don't know if you have any comments towards that kind of investigation.
Yeah, I mean, so that was like one of the, like, what I was interested about this from the start was like this new technology comes out. It's like, you know, for all its flaws, which, you know, I could spend hours talking about as well. It's like also truly an incredible technology. Yeah. So it was like, how can we use this to like help learn more about the world? And that this was like sort of a proof of concept about like how can we take big text at scale and like distill it down into like quantitative numeric, like what we would call structured data, so that you can then put it into all of the like traditional statistic and machine learning algorithms that I teach all of my students, you know. So that's I mean, and like this wasn't only for Colombia. That this
No.
the point of this was that like wherever you have text about things going on, you could use it to sort of like this process of like extracting structured information from large text data sets and then using those for predictive or explanatory models.
Yeah, I mean, you can throw it into a bar chart and then I'll understand. Then I will understand because I'm not. Galia, you had a comment.
David, can I ask you a question? So these large language models are not new, no? Because we have worked with them. So what is the difference? Because you are an expert. What is the difference with those, the ones that used to count the words and ChatGPT and this type of AI? So what was the difference in those type of models?
So there was this huge, I mean, like the Google 2017 Transformer paper, and then like building up these big like large language models are just such a big step forward from like 2010 style like natural language processing, where they started to do some of this like word embeddings to like understand what words really, how they relate to each other and all that. But like this move into these like generative AI was like that came out with basically ChatGPT 3. Is just like the ability to like that it's like self-driving almost, I think, is what enables this. Instead of having to like manually code and go through all of these things and like write specific models for specific use cases, you have these big foundation like large language models, these generative AI like ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever, that you can just ask it a question and it gives you an answer. Like that hadn't really existed before 2022, 2023, right? So that it's like these models are just like the context window, the ability to that there were models in 2010 that could take 3 or 5 words and guess what the next word was going to be, but these can read 1,000-word articles and like synthesize all of that information. So it's the model's getting bigger and getting more like sophisticated and what they can do, so that they are more general purpose, I think, is what like really was the shift that enabled this to happen now rather than 10 years ago.
Just incredible.
One of the things that surprised me the most, there was this article, beautiful written. It was an opinion piece about, and very poetic written, about the violence and someone's death. Oh my God, the translation into English of the subtleties of the language, I was at art. And I think this is also important to start thinking about is, so what David is talking about is the democratization, no? That a person like me that doesn't know how to code, I can go and put my text in ChatGPT and say, summarize it, no? But also the other aspect is English, no? That we do a lot of research in English. So this opens up also the window to democratize the canonical language to other types of language like Spanish. So the translations are really very well done for Spanish. Margaret, we were talking about this one day, and she was saying that Icelandic is not as good, but they're working on it. So there are different languages that are some more advanced than others, but I think it's very important to be thinking about this democratization in different realms.
I think, yeah, I mean, there's so much, well, I mean, it's democratization. And of course, this, I would say, in terms of Spanish, being able to look to the global South for the information and interpret it, as opposed to looking to, articles in English. I mean, the information does exist in Spanish. I think that's very exciting. If we come back to the report that you wrote, and there's that open question in it, is of whether there is a relationship between coca plant eradication and violence. I think I know the answer, but Galia, how did you find the outcomes?
So we're talking, we're having a discussion with the literature, no? that have been written about it. So first of all, there is not a lot of literature. There are so few papers that have been written about it. So there is a quantitative and the qualitative papers. So the qualitative papers in general, they says that yes, there is a lot of violence. The quantitative papers are much more not as straightforward. Isn't it, David? And you did that literature review.
Yeah, so there are lots of papers that find some like positive association that if like in areas where there's more either aerial spraying or manual eradication of the coca plants, there are more negative outcomes, whether that's violence or migration or like sort of all sorts of a suite of like negative outcomes. But we were unable to find that, and our data set was much larger, and that's sort of one of the interesting things that you're never like super stunned and like not have a positive or negative finding, right? Like, but we find like basically no relationship at all, which we thought was like kind of an interesting like disagreement with some of the literature out there on what ours is a much bigger data set.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I mean, obviously, as a journalist here, I would have disputed that straight up. What about forced displacement? Is that picked up as a violent event, or is it provoked by, let's say, a physical violent event that results in, I don't know, a death or a physical harm? I mean, because forced displacement in Colombia and internally displaced people, I mean, this is a huge issue, I suppose, now behind Syria, Venezuela, and elsewhere. But is that considered a violent event in your research then, Galia? No.
We did not consider it because it's really hard, isn't it? So there is a lot of people that move from the rural areas to the urban areas. How they're not data sets. They're not newspapers that make it. So that's the other thing. No, there is how do we define violence? No, how do we define murders? How we define mass murders? No, we have this conversation. So what is, in a way, the newspapers are sensationalist, that the biggest things get, but if you are just one person, will it get into the newspapers? And that's the problematic about the question that you ask us. It is violent? Yes. Did we measure it? No, because that's not part of our data set, and our data set is not a direct. So when you think about how to collect this data, so it's just opportunistic, no? So for example, all the types of opportunistic data set is like going to the morgues, no? To ask, and this is actually when you began looking at, so there is different ways of collecting this data. So for human rights, one is to have direct asking of the households and say, has you been affected? And that has happened in very few occasions, not in Latin America, but in other places. Other one is when you have is statistical models, when you have this growth of the population and you expect the growth of the population and the population doesn't grow. So that's the way that they do it, statistically speaking. And the third one is our way, that's the one that the people uses the most. So going back is, you are completely right. That's a very violent event that you have to leave all your things. But we cannot count it because we don't have the data set, and the type of data that we're looking at will never really say. They're just numbers that people say. There, for example, in Colombia, they say that there are 8 million people that have been displaced. No, it's almost New York. It's almost Bogota. So the whole Bogota city has been actually moved out. And coming from Michigan, Detroit, that had like 3 million people, and the whole 3 million people moved. So people don't realize how big is that displacement. No, it's like everybody except 3 million just moved out of New York or has been killed, or so that's huge, isn't it? When you start really looking at it. But our data set, unfortunately, doesn't capture that because we do not have way of looking at it.
And you also exempted, I think it was victims of landmines. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we did not do it like much about it, but we have the data. We do know, David, we did count it.
How was that?
And this
How
is
was
what is
that?
beautiful
Reveal,
about
give me some info. Because it's awful as well. I mean, it's truly awful. I have friends who grew up in Nariño, you know.
And this is this beauty of this data set, that we just have one paper, but you can have so many different analyses of just one case that is Colombia. So imagine what you could actually do for something else.
So I have another comment about some of the things, and then, you know, I think I could listen to you guys for hours because it is so very interesting. But you found that violence increased between 2005 and 2015. I find that, again, quite clear. This statistic, I suppose, is taken, but it's taken out of the 30 years. Is 82% drop in murder rates since 2016. So that was 2016 to 2022, right?
Yes.
So we
building and then back down. So that's like one of the things from this is just sort of like high level descriptive statistics of where the violence was and what the trends. So you can see that it sort of ramped up leading to the peace process, and that was sort of primarily sort of in the Southwest and the FARC held areas. And then like during the peace process, it went down, and then sort of more recently, you could see the violence shifting farther north and east and being less FARC and more ELN and other paramilitary groups, and sort of out of those Southwestern and sort of more north and east. So that you can see the types of violence changing, the people committing the violence, or the groups doing the violence changing, and then also geographically where it is.
It's an incredible opportunity to, again, map the evolution of, the conflict within Colombia. But I'm going to throw that statistic and that data at people who then, question the how successful, let's say, and there's a lot of things we could debate, and I think Galia and I would debate it forever, but how successful the peace accords were. But if you can say an 82% drop in murder rates since 2016 is quite telling. It's quite telling. And why, I think we'll wind this down a little bit, but you've also got another statistic there, 2013, the most violence in the country attributed to the FARC. Galia, perhaps you could tell us why would you say that? I know this isn't a statistical thing. I just want to hear your interpretation of what happened in 2013.
What did we discuss, David, 2013? What was the issue?
I was here, and I do remember reporting on violence, of course, but I don't, and I do remember running into the guerrillas at some point, but it was we
wrote this paper quite a couple months ago. Because we had this discussion, didn't we? We had a discussion. What happened in 2013? We actually went. Was something happening?
Would you say it was an increase in violence for the guerrillas? Because that's, around this time when there were the clandestine talks taking place, and of course, when you think about it in conflict resolution, the group will want to negotiate from a position of strength. Perhaps. I don't know. I'm just saying.
That was given. So that's what David was talking about. That before the peace process, you always try to show up like you are saying, no, Richard. You're always that you actually control a lot of the territory. So to begin being a strong force on the table and to get as much extraction as you can. But there was something about that 2013 that we actually discussed, that it was a specific year. I don't remember what was our...
It might have also been that there was one newspaper that was like very like, so I think some of it was like if you look at where the data comes from, that there was one newspaper that published just way more articles that year, so that it like when you think about like what our data set is made up of, like there are violent events, and then some of those get written in the newspaper, and then those get parsed by ChatGPT, and then those get into our data set, and like the like rate at each of those steps is not always constant every year. So that there's, you know, if one of the newspaper editors in one year decides like, hey, I'm going to publish a ton of articles, that to us looks like a huge spike in violence, when really it was just like a huge spike in the like article writing rate. So
interesting that it could be.
Example,
I mean, that's
we have really good data for what we consider mass killings, and we can debate what mass killings are, isn't it? So, but the big ones, our data set is really, really strong because the newspapers report them. Other thing that is actually very interesting is, so for example, the data of the Centro of Memoria Histórica, you have victims, you have ELN, you have, so our data set, though it's not complete, many times we can tell, so for example, what part of the FARC were, El Frente Teófilo, or so that I think that also it's a level of granularity that not just on the crime side, but also on the victim side, no? It was a kid, how old, how it happened, who was there, all these. There are so many things that we can write about it. This is just one article about much more about the methods.
And when you talk about mass killings, the technicalities here in Colombia is a massacre is 3 or more people, I think. Is that how you were looking at it? Okay, so you're using the Colombian
dictator. Either pass that is 3 or more people. That's what it was.
Yeah. Okay, and so are you going to extend this research into up to the current date? Because I'd like to see, for example, for the last 4 years, the last 8 years, what's been going on, and be able to, you know, actually make some considerations about what's going on. Because I talk to analysts and other analysts all the time, and we have the same. A lot of them have the same sort of thing. It's like, today Colombia is better than it was 15 years ago, and 15 years ago, Colombia was better than it was 15 years prior to that. It would be really fascinating now, because obviously the newspapers and everyone else and the word on the street, Colombia is awful, violence is way up, everybody feels unsafe. There's there's the brain drain, and there's the money is being taken out of the country and so on. Yes, there is an uptick in violence. Of course there is, but can we put it into context with recent years? I think, please, can you do that study, is what I'm asking. Please.
We tried, David and I and Margaret, we tried. So this grant, this was possible because of the National Science Foundation grant that we got. And this is the 5th year. So we're done with that. David and I, we tried to actually put it online with digital humanities, and to create a website and a data set that you can actually be searchable and do maps and all the cool stuff. Our new president got power, and also we know that he cut all the funding from all the federal level. So all those grants that we wanted to apply, they got canceled. So we have to wait when things change or to see. So right now we don't have the money, because it takes a lot of money, not for us. The researchers, we don't get that money, but is to pay our students to by the computers and all those, the softwares and all of those things.
Yeah, I was hoping we wouldn't have to mention the political situation, but it was all too clear when you were mentioning the grant right at the beginning of the national. I was like, oh God, they've got no more money. That's the thing that went through my mind right when you said it. I was like, well,
And
at
this
some
is
point
actually
there will
something
be.
that happens to a lot of these type of digital humanities type of research, that you have beautiful things online, and after a couple years there is no more funding. So I think this is a call to begin really looking at funding as an important tool to create memory, to create data sets for posterity and for researchers, and also for everyday people, that knowledge matters, just not from Colombia, but for other type of things that researchers want to do.
Well, I think, yeah, that's a wonderful place to bring this to an end. And I'd like to thank you both for sharing not only your time, but your sort of unlimitless knowledge on these topics. First, David Anderson, Associate Professor of Analytics at Villanova University in Pennsylvania. Thank you so much. You've clarified a lot of mystery in my mind. Sometimes when I get faced with data sets of this nature and acronyms, a fog just appears over my eyes and in my mind. I'm really a humanities person, so thank you for putting it into plain English for me. And for some of my listeners, most of them are far more intelligent, so that's okay. Thank you again. And of course to Galia Benitez. Yeah, it's been and Galia Benitez, Associate Professor in International Relations at Michigan State, obviously bringing your expertise and personal story to the table is, of course, incredibly important to run this alongside the data. So thank you to you as well for this. And please keep on trying to get this online. Let's get this out there more into a public domain so people can see it. I will, of course, be sharing the article out on our social media and hopefully getting it out there to more academics in circles here in Colombia to have a look at. So thank you again, both of you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
For inviting
You're most
us.
welcome.
Thank you.
I've been Richard McColl here for the Colombia Calling podcast here in Bogota, talking to two esteemed guests this week. We'll be back next week with more interviews using Colombia as a lens for conversations about this part of the world. So thank you again and goodbye.